Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us. A very, very warm welcome to all of you. Thank you for taking the time to listen in on this seminar, on this webinar. This is a very special event for us. It is a very special event for me personally too. You know, every time I walk out of the apartment block my family lives in Berlin, I come across a brass stepping stone right in front of the house. It reminds us of Bertha Salomon, who was killed in Auschwitz. And I have to say, I'm touched by it every time I walk past. I'm extremely grateful for this daily reminder of people whose lives were forcefully destroyed by the most brutal regime. I'm grateful to be reminded of the horrors and the atrocities that happened in the past. As Federal President Steinmeier said when visiting Yad Vashem in 2020, and I quote, "The perpetrators were Germans. Those who murdered, those who planned and helped in the murdering, the many who silently towed the line, they were Germans. The industrial mass murder of 6 million Jews, the worst crime in the history of humanity, it was committed by my countrymen." End of quote. Now, Germany obviously bears a special historical responsibility to keep remembrance alive. We must learn from the past if we truly are to contribute to creating a better world without hatred, discrimination, and ultimately genocide. And today we must challenge distortion and denial of the atrocities of the past, of the Holocaust, or the genocide of the Roma. Shockingly, the number of anti-Semitic attacks worldwide is rising once again, with the highest number of incidents reported in major Western democracies, including the United States, France, Britain, and Germany, as studies show. And social media has become a vehicle for anti-Semitism. Ladies and gentlemen, for the past year, Germany has had the honor of holding the presidency of the 34 member states International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, the IRA, where we made safeguarding the record of the Holocaust, countering Holocaust distortion or diminishing, or that of the genocide of the Roma, important strategic aims, as well as focusing on combating anti-Semitism and anti-Gypsyism. And it is in this framework that we here in the embassy started preparing for today's event. And I am delighted, truly delighted, that this became a joint project with the Embassy of Israel here in Ireland. Ladies and gentlemen, recent attacks on Jews in Germany and other parts of the world, rising conspiracy myths and incidences of Holocaust denial and distortion have shown that we cannot stop in our efforts to remember and learn, because these attacks undoubtedly make clear that anti-Semitism, for instance, is not a phenomenon of the past. That is why remembering must also be a tool to pause and reflect on how we can make a difference today in countering anti-Semitism or intolerance, Holocaust denial. It needs all our support. Now, ladies and gentlemen, there is also another angle to remembering, which I would like to mention briefly, because this year we celebrate 1,700 years of Jewish life in Germany, highlighting Jewish life over the centuries and make it more visible, to share positive narratives too. All over Germany, around 1,000 digital events will be taking place, so it might be interesting for you to follow some of them. Dear participants, remembering takes very many and diverse forms. I'm grateful that we will now have the chance to meet two excellent, successful projects of remembrance today and talk about their experience and the path they choose to make remembrance tangible and accessible. And I'm very much looking forward to the exchange. First of all, I am now delighted to pass the floor to my good friend, the Ambassador of Israel to Ireland. Dear Ophir, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Daika. Good afternoon, everybody. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure to join you today for this event on the topic of Holocaust remembrance. I believe that it is our responsibility today to ensure that the younger generations are not only educated about the Holocaust, but also feel connected and feel a connection to it. I would like to thank Ambassador Potel, my dear friend Daika, and her colleagues from the Embassy of Germany in Ireland, who had the initiative to organize this event to mark the German chairmanship of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, IHRA. I would also like to thank Germany and express Israel's appreciation for its commitment to Holocaust remembrance and its active role, as was also manifested during its chairmanship of IHRA. Professor Anne Fuchs, director of the UCD Humanities Institute, has kindly agreed to moderate this event and give her expertise in post-Holocaust, and given her expertise in post-Holocaust German cultural memory, I know she will add a great deal to the discussion. I would also like to acknowledge the presence here of Tommy Reichenthal, who by sharing his own personal story of survival, has done so much to spread the awareness of the Holocaust in Ireland, particularly among the younger generation. You will hear today about two projects, one from Germany and one from Israel, which uniquely ensure that the memory of the Holocaust is brought right in front of our eyes on the streets and into our homes. The Stolperstein are well known for many of us who have traveled in Europe and observed the brass plaques on pavements in many countries that simply state, here lived that and that person. It is an idea which is simple, but also deeply profound, and brings names to the numbers that we so often hear of. We will also hear about Zikaron Basalon, which in Hebrew means remembrance in the living room. This idea, this project, is rooted in a simple premise that is creating shared, intimate encounters between those who survived the Holocaust and small groups of friends or family in their living rooms. However, like the Stolperstein project, by bringing immediacy to the unimaginable events of the Holocaust, it allows us to take some steps, maybe, towards understanding it. Each year on January 27th, the anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, the international community marks Holocaust Remembrance Day. In Israel, we mark Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Martyrs and Heroes Remembrance Day, on the 27th day of the month of Nisan, of the Hebrew calendar, which this year falls on April 8th. This anniversary is marked around roughly around the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. These days of commemoration are vitally important. However, we must ensure that these days are not just dates on a calendar, but that they also carry weight and meaning, especially for younger generations. Our duty is to not just to remember and honor the victims, but also actively ensure that such catastrophe never be repeated. During Germany's impressive chairmanship, I would say, of the IHRA, they have prioritized efforts to combat distortion of the Holocaust. It is easy to spot Holocaust denial, but far more difficult to recognize Holocaust distortion. Unfortunately, the past year has provided many opportunities for cynical actors to use the memory of the Holocaust as a tool for campaigning and spreading conspiracy theories. We see symbols of the Holocaust used on placards and on social media to spread misinformation. We see offensive comparisons made and the vocabulary of the Holocaust weaponized to hurl insults. This is not only desecrating the memories of the victims of Nazism, but degrading the Holocaust survivors. It is incumbent on us all to work to challenge this distortion of the Holocaust. As the nation state of the Jewish people and the home of its majority, Israel is committed to the principles of Holocaust remembrance and also firmly engaged in the ongoing struggle against anti-Semitism and its manifestations in Holocaust denial and distortion. The IRA definition of anti-Semitism, a comprehensive definition that includes all types of contemporary anti-Semitism, is an important tool to this end, and we hope to see more and more countries adopt it. We will continue to work with the rest of the international community towards these goals. At this point, I would like to thank you all and thank again Ambassador Porter. And I would like to hand the floor back to you, Ambassador, to introduce the next speakers and go on.
Thank you so much, Ofer. Thank you. I am now delighted to hand over to Professor Anne Fuchs, who will moderate our discussion. I said that before, Anne, but I'm just so delighted that you accepted the invitation to join us today to moderate, given, as Ofer was saying, your extensive experience in that field. You've worked extensively on the issue of remembrance culture. So you will also introduce the panelists to us all. So thank you for that. And with that, I pass the floor to you. I'm really excited. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much to both of you for the invitation and for arranging this extremely important event. Now, we've already touched on many issues which were part of my own introduction, so I'm going to cut my introductions because I think it is more important that we hear from our two representatives who are going to talk about the projects themselves. But I do want to just raise a few overarching questions as a framework for our ensuing discussion. So looking at the challenges of Holocaust remembrance in the 21st century, I think we are facing four particular pressing challenges. The first one is, of course, the fact that we are now facing growing historical distance from the event and the fact that the generation of eyewitnesses are fading, which brings us to the question of how to reach out to contemporary audiences globally. The second challenge, I think, concerns, and the ambassadors have already touched upon this, the context of rising anti-Semitism and of right-wing populist movements, which successfully exploit social media to spread misinformation, hatred, while also providing platforms for Holocaust denial. And this is actually a very difficult issue because it is not easy to combat social media. The third challenge, as I see it, concerns the established formats of official commemoration practices, which tend to employ highly ritualized expressions of remembrance. And of course, this is not surprising because official forms of remembrance require official frames. But perhaps these frames no longer reach younger audiences and they have become exhausted. So the fourth challenge then concerns the competition over different memories in transnational and multicultural settings where normative models of remembrance are being contested by competing memories. So the question then is, how can we communicate the memory of the Holocaust and keep it alive? And now we are going to discuss two projects which, in my view, have provided fascinating and highly imaginative models for an effective and visceral engagement with the Holocaust. I will skip my introduction about the Stolpersteine and about your project, Sharon, because you are the experts on this. So let me just briefly introduce our two panelists. Dr. Ann Thomas is representing Günter Demnig here, a well-known German performance and installation artist who developed the Stolpersteine project, and you will hear from him in a video message very shortly. Anne grew up in Great Britain, where she studied European studies at the University of Bath, followed by an MA and then PhD at the University of Warwick. She is now responsible for the laying of the Stolpersteine and their inscriptions in different languages in all European countries except Germany. She's also a translator from Russian and German into English and a freelance journalist. Sharon Buenos has a long and deep experience in the public sector. For example, she worked for the Israeli Foreign Ministry and then as a director of the Israeli House in London. After returning to Israel, she became marketing director of the Or Movement, an Israeli NGO focusing on developing communities and infrastructures in the Negev and Galilee regions. And today, she is the global director of the Zikaron Basalon project. Sharon and Anne, I'm really welcoming you very warmly. We are so much looking forward to your presentations and the ensuing discussions. I need to say a few things about housekeeping for the audience. So just two more remarks. Members of the audience, please note that your mics and cameras will remain switched off during the presentations and the entire event. But of course, you're warmly invited and indeed strongly encouraged to type your questions into the Q&A chat box, which you will find at the bottom of your screens. Herr Henneberg from the German Embassy will then help me feed them back to the panelists. And please note that this event is being recorded and will be turned into a podcast. Right, enough from me. I'm now going to hand over to Anne Thomas, who will introduce the Stolpersteine project to us all. So Anne, over to you.
Hello, so thank you very much, first of all, for inviting the Stolperstein project and me representing Gunther Demnig, who has made a video message for you from Germany, which Robert will hopefully turn on right now. If I just, Robert, please, could you, thank you very much.
Are we having a technical issue here, Robert? If it takes a bit longer, maybe Anne and I can have a little conversation about the Stolpersteine project so as not to lose time. Or is it working now?
Hallo nach Dublin und ganz herzliche Grüße an alle Teilnehmer, Zuhörer, Zuschauer, die ja digital beteiligt sind. Dank für die Einladung, Dank im Namen der Crew Stolpersteine. Wir freuen uns sehr, dass dieses Zusammentreffen virtuell zustande kommt, denn es sind ja zwei Projekte, die nicht sehr konträr sind an sich, aber letztendlich irgendwo einen gemeinsamen Gedanken haben. Was vor allen Dingen für unser Projekt Stolpersteine immer wieder wichtig ist, das Zusammenbringen von jungen Leuten, von Schülern, Studenten mit Angehörigen. Zum Teil gibt es ja noch Zeitzeugen, aber es sind ja jetzt Enkel, zum Teil Urenkel, die wissen wollen, was ist damals passiert, wie konnte das passieren, wollen ihr Familienschicksal wissen. Das ist auch ein Grund, die Stolpersteine ins Leben gerufen zu haben. Die Idee zu den Stolpersteinen kam natürlich nicht aus dem hohlen Bauch, einfach so ganz plötzlich. Es gab eine Vorarbeit in Köln im Jahr 1990. Zur Erinnerung, ich meine 1940 waren aus Köln, Düsseldorf, Hamburg jeweils 1000 Rom und Sinti deportiert worden. Das war eine Generalprobe für die spätere Deportation der jüdischen Bevölkerung. Zur Erinnerung habe ich zusammen mit dem Rom e.V. eine Schriftspur auf die Straße gedruckt. Von den Wohnhäusern zur Deutzer Messe. Von dort gingen die Deportationen los. Aber die Wohnhäuser waren ja eigentlich die Orte, wo das Grauen begonnen hat. Und das war die Überlegung, hier wohnte. Ja, einfach den Namen dorthin zurückzubringen, wo das Grauen begonnen hat, wo sie zu Hause waren. Und der Rabbi von Köln hat mir dann mitgegeben aus dem Talmud, ein Mensch ist erst vergessen, wenn sein Name vergessen ist. Die erste Idee war durchaus Tafeln an die Wand, aber die meisten Hausbesitzer hätten abgelehnt. Dann kam die Idee, in Blech schlagen und dann diese Stolpersteine herzustellen und vor den Wohnhäusern zu verlegen. Das heißt, den Namen zurückzubringen. Es sind jetzt in ganz Europa ungefähr 86.000 Steine verlegt in 26 Ländern. Also überall dort, wo die Wehrmacht, die deutsche Wehrmacht, die Nazis, die SS, die Gestapo ihr Unwesen getrieben haben, dass dort die Namen der Opfer zurückkommen. Wobei ich gerade diese beiden Projekte, das einmal im kleinen Kreis vermitteln und die Steine eben wirklich verteilen, ich finde es einfach eine tolle Ergänzung. Genauso wie ich sage, die Steine sind eine sehr schöne Ergänzung zum Holocaust-Denkmal in Berlin. Ich wünsche der Veranstaltung alles Gute. Grüße noch an Dr. Anne Thomas, die mich jetzt vertreten wird, weil sie das als Native Speaker besser kann.
So I think you can hear me now. So that was Gunter Demnig speaking to you from Germany. I'm speaking to you from England, where, talking of anti-Semitism, just this week, a pregnant Jewish woman was attacked in London. So it's absolutely shocking. And I too was going to talk about this rise, but we'll talk about that later on in the discussion. So I've been working with Gunter Demnig for about 10 years now. I'm the international coordinator of this project. When I began, there were Stolpersteine mainly in Germany, a little bit in Austria, a few were in Italy. Now they're in 26 countries, mainly Europe, and then there's obviously one in Argentina. That's the only country outside of Europe. There are none, I'll start with Ireland. I wasn't going to, but we may as well. There are none in Ireland, but we do have a project to possibly place one for a woman named Etty Steinberg, who left Dublin and went to Antwerpen, and with her husband, who was Belgian, and they had a child and they were deported, I think from France. I'm not entirely sure, but we could talk about that later. But she was deported and killed in Auschwitz. So we would place a Stolpersteine for her in Dublin. Obviously, otherwise there would be none in Ireland, because, as Gunter Demnig just said, they're always placed in countries where the Nazis were, or in countries where there were collaborators. So we now have a project in Spain, which they're called memory stones, and they're not covered in brass plates, they're covered in stainless steel, and they commemorate the direct victims of Franco. Otherwise, we also have Stolperstein for Spanish Republicans who were deported from France to Mauthausen and killed by the Nazis. So anyway, to go back to the inscriptions, as you saw, the Stolperstein is one block of concrete, which is covered in a brass plate. What they all have are an individual name. You have one stone per person. You don't have any stones for families. It's always one individual, one stone, one memory, so to speak. There's always the name of a person. There's always the year of birth, if we know it. There's always then what happened to them, if they were arrested, if they were deported, the date of their murder, if we know it. Those are the important things. And as Gunter said, it's always hier wohnte or hier lived, or whatever language. Each Stolperstein inscription is in the language of the country in which it's placed. That's usually one language, but it can be two. In Czech Republic, in some places, it might be in Czech and in Slovak. In parts of Italy, it might be in Slovenian and in Italian. But in Spain next week, we're placing some in the Basque country, so they'll be in Basque and in Spanish. But the important thing is here lived, because the Stolpersteine remind people of the living and where people lived, not where they died. They're never placed in front of a concentration camp, definitely not. They're never placed in front of a cemetery. Stolpersteine are always placed in front of the last home of choice of a victim. This is to show that people were evicted from their daily lives. The Stolpersteine can, as the ambassador just said, in Germany, where I usually live, they're in Berlin, they're everywhere, but they're actually everywhere in Germany. They're in small villages, they're in small towns, they're in rich parts, they're in poor parts, they're literally everywhere. And they remind people that the victims of the Nazis were everywhere. They could be anywhere. And they challenge that cliched view as well of where victims, especially Jewish victims, but as I wanted to say, the Stolpersteine are for all victims of the Nazis from 1933 to 1945. I've just spoken about the Spanish Republicans. They're also for Jehovah's Witnesses. They're also for homosexuals. They're for communists. They're for homeless people who were considered to be unnecessary members of society by the Nazis, therefore Christians. So any victim of the National Socialists, and also they are not only for people who were killed by the National Socialists, they're also for people who survived the camps or people who were able to escape in time, those who were able to go to Chile, to Argentina, to Palestine at the time, or those who came over to England in particular in the Kindertransport to Northern Ireland as well. The Stolpersteine can be placed for those people too. And I'm using the word Stolperstein. I'm sorry if this is a problem for you, but I find it's sometimes translated into English as stumbling block or stumbling stone, which I don't think works. So I continue to use the German term always of Stolperstein, which in a sense has a kind of double meaning, which translates poorly into English. Stein means stone, stolpern means to stumble. So you do stumble over a stone and you stop. But it can also mean to jolt. So when you stumble over it, your memory is effectively triggered. And one student whom Gunther Demnig likes to quote and whom he met one day, he said, this young boy said to Gunther, you don't actually trip on a Stolperstein, you stumble with your head and your heart. So what I wanted to say exactly, as Gunther said, is that the key idea was that the Stolperstein was placed in front of the last home of choice. And he said, and I'd like to quote him here, Stolpersteine remind local residents of what happened. The stones prevent forgetting. They bring back the name of each individual victim. People were continually socially downgraded until they were forced into ghettos or forced to leave the country. Everyone read about it. They saw it. They heard it. The individual names are important to me. The stones create a place of memory since almost all the stones I lay are for people who do not have a gravestone. I wanted current residents to think about what happened, and I wanted to do something for the relatives. So the Stolpersteine make people aware of the past. But at the same time, and this is where we get to the questions that Anna Fuchs was mentioning earlier on, that originally it was often people in Germany who wanted to place a Stolperstein. They were non-Jewish people who might live in a building where there had been Jewish people deported from. They would then place the Stolperstein. It was about atoning perhaps for the sins of the parents or even their own sins, that's in cases. Now it's changing very much. The Stolpersteine are now being initiated by much younger people, perhaps the great-great-grandchildren, who are actually placing Stolpersteine to talk about discrimination today. So as we see the rise of anti-Semitism in Germany, the rise of the far right all over, people are placing Stolperstein to talk about today, to talk about the past in order to prevent anything ever happening like this ever again. So there's a kind of change in the people organizing, whereas it used to be older people who were doing it, it's now more and more young people who are actually taking initiative themselves. What, as Gunther said, we've always worked with pupils in schools, but now it's young people taking their own initiative. And one other thing I'd like to say, and then we'll get on to the discussion, the Stolpersteine is a grassroots project. And without all the volunteers who do the research, we wouldn't have been able to place 86,000 Stolpersteine yet. It's just incredible. Gunther Demnig no longer has time to make the Stolperstein himself. He usually spends, in pre-pandemic times, he was spending about 300 days a year on the road and on his knees making Stolpersteine, traveling all over the continent and placing them. So for over 10 years now, one man has been making them, and his name is Michael Friedrichs-Friedländer. He's just outside of, oh, I'm being asked to wrap it up. So do we have time for the BBC film, or should we just leave it here? because I was going to move on to, I was just going to give you a little film about a volunteer who's incredible, who's been cleaning the Stolpersteine in Salzburg.
You have time for the film, yeah?
Okay, so thank you to all volunteers, and questions later, and thank you, Robert, for showing the film.
Ich versuche, die Erinnerungssteine an Ludwig und Emilie Fischer sowie Frau Amalie Löwy zu reinigen, sodass sie wieder besser wahrgenommen werden. Es passiert aber auch sehr oft, wenn man dann sieht, dass da an Kinder erinnert wird, 2, 3 Jahre alt, dass man dann schon auch sich die Frage stellt, was wäre aus dir geworden, wenn das damals nicht passiert wäre mit dir. Ich habe da ein Tuch, das ich verwende, wenn ich die letzten Reste vom Putzmittel wegwische. Und da kommt einem durch den Sinn, als wie wenn man jemanden eben zum letzten Mal streichelt und grüßt. Man sieht es, wie sich die Welt entwickelt, dieser Nationalismus einfach stark zunimmt. Und da möchte ich also etwas beitragen, dass das durch die Erinnerung an diese schreckliche Zeit verhindert wird, dass das so einfach wiederkommt.
Okay, thanks very much. And obviously we'll come back to your presentation, for the discussion, for the comparison of the two projects. At this point, though, I want to immediately hand over to Sharon, who is going to introduce us to her project.
Hi, everyone. I'm very excited to be here, and I'm honored to share the screen with all of you today. And thank you for having us. I would like to tell you a little bit about Zikaron Basalon, why we need Zikaron Basalon, why Zikaron Basalon started. I'll tell you my personal connection, and then we'll just explain shortly how the event works. So we always ask our participants, how do you commemorate the Holocaust? Why do we need Zikaron Basalon? Zikaron Basalon is needed for 2 main reasons. The first one is to take ownership and responsibility of commemorating the Holocaust. The Holocaust Remembrance, it's not something just for state institutes or government officials to tell us how to remember, but we must take it into our own hands, and we must take responsibility on commemorating the Holocaust. The second reason is the Holocaust survivors. In Israel, on Yom HaShoah, which is only 2 weeks away, which is the National Holocaust Remembrance Day, we have a lot of films about the Holocaust, a lot of official ceremonies, but for the survivors, it's just another day. And with Zikaron Basalon, we're taking the survivors, we're opening our homes and our hearts for the survivors, and we're letting them in, and we're listening to their stories. Just want to go over briefly about the image of Holocaust survivors in Israel. And after the war, when the survivors arrived to Israel, the country was young, it was too busy establishing itself, and there was really no room to deal with the trauma and discuss all the horrific things that the survivors had to go through. However, in 1953, Yad Vashem opens, and we start gathering the testimonies. 1961 is a turning point in the image of the survivors in Israel with the Eichmann trial, and in just a couple of weeks we will mark 60 years since the trial. This was in fact the first time that survivors shared their stories and the Israelis listened. In 1993, with the Spielberg Archive, a huge project to record testimonies, and in 2011, Zikaron Basalon was established, the first salon, finally opening, as I said, opening the hearts and the homes of Israelis to the survivors. I want to tell you that the first salon took place 10 years ago with just over 50 people, and last year we had over 1.5 million people in Israel and 55 countries around the world participating in the Zikaron Basalon event. Our average age of participants is between 25 and 30 years old. I want to tell you my personal connection to Zikaron Basalon and why I believe so much in this project and why I'm so honored to be part of it. Let's go back to 2016, well before the world pandemic. I was at the time working for the Israeli Embassy in London, and I joined the UK delegation for March of the Living. I heard about this movement starting in Israel called Zikaron Basalon, and I thought to myself, I should invite some friends and create the event. I got on the website, I understood what the event looks like, and I made some phone calls. I arrived to Poland and I joined the delegation. And the next morning, when we were traveling to Auschwitz for the march, my sister sends me a message and she's asking me to say a prayer for Bernie Spear. I immediately reply back, not understanding why of all 6 million names that she could have chosen from, including some members of our own family, she chose Bernie. She didn't reply, and I did what we all do when we don't know the answer, and I turned to Dr. Google. I found an article about Bernie, and you can see him on the screen in front of you. And I learned that Bernie was only 19 when he was killed in Auschwitz. He was taken from Holland, where he had his first love, Alice Laman, and they made a promise to each other when he was taken away. The first, that they will look for each other after the war, and the second, that they will keep a journal to each other. Bernie was only able to keep half of his promise, and from Auschwitz, he kept a journal for Alice. In his last entry, he writes, "If these are my final words that are addressing to you, my Alicia, please accept again my love, which I cannot describe in words, my belief, my hope, and determination that one day I will be so lucky and you will be my wife." I keep reading the article and I learned that after the war, Alice indeed looked for Bernie, and when she realized that he was gone, she made Aliyah. On her wedding day, a messenger came to her door and brought the journals from Bernie. It took Alicia over 60 years to open these journals. I took Bernie in my heart, and he's been in my heart ever since. I took him on the march with me. It was very emotional, and I kept taking photos and sending them back to my sister. As we were walking out after the beautiful and moving ceremony, I finally got a word from my sister on why Bernie. She shared with me that the night before in Jerusalem, she hosted for Zikaron Basalon, Alice. Alicia was there to share her story and Bernie's story to all of my sister's friends. I'm really sad to say that Alicia passed away 2 months ago. She was a very big part of Zikaron Basalon, and every year she came back and she told her story. But thanks to Zikaron Basalon, her story will live with us. Now, I'd like to go back to London, back in 2016, just a few days after the march. I hosted my first event, my first Zikaron Basalon. In the photo, you see Malak Tribik. She's well known. She's been traveling all over the UK and talking to students and high schoolers and so on. But the first thing she said when she sat down on my sofa, addressing my friends, she said, "This is very strange for me. I'm not used to speaking to such a small audience." And for me, I felt as if I made a big mistake. Someone was punching me in the tummy. I could not believe it. I thought, I'm wasting her time, and what have I done? Why did I need to do it? At the end of the event, which was moving and meaningful and beautiful, I approached Mala to apologize. And she said to me, "Don't be silly, you've changed my life." I challenged her because I thought this is very odd. How could I, with this small gathering, change her life? And she said, in fact, that was the first time that when she spoke to an audience, the eyes spoke back to her. She's used to speaking from a podium on a stage. She never sees who she's talking to. But in this occasion, she was able to see us, and she was able to get the love that we had for her. Mala kept coming back to my living room, to my lounge every year after that. And after we came back to Israel, she even participated on Zoom. So let's talk about what is Zikaron Basalon. To us, Zikaron Basalon is a journey through time. We start in the past and we listen. We listen to a testimony by a Holocaust survivor, second or third generation, a recorded testimony or a book, whatever we feel that we need to use for the event. I want to say, to go back to my opening remarks, Zikaron Basalon is important for the well-being of the survivors, because what they really want is to be remembered. And this is exactly what we offer them. We are taking their stories with us, and we pass them to our friends and from generation to generation. The second part is the present. We move to the present with the expressive part, which can be through a song, reading a poem, some music. And this is our time. This is like a hallway for us to use from the testimony to the third part, where we can reflect, we can process what we just heard, and come back to here and now. The final part is our time to talk and look to the future. And this is where, to us, it's all the three parts are important, and it took us 10 years to really come up with the best solution for Zikaron Basalon, the best formula of Zikaron Basalon. By the discussion, by us challenging ourselves with hard questions. We are not there as a viewer. We're not just there to receive, but we are in fact taking an active role in shaping Holocaust memory for ourselves. So these are the very, very simple parts. And I want to say that it takes 5 minutes to put together, but the impact is huge. Now for our German friends here on this call, I want to share with you a very special event that took place on International Holocaust Remembrance Day with Mrs. Budenbender, who joined us for a Zikaron Basalon with Holocaust survivor Sarah Goodman, and together with the Israeli ambassador to Berlin and the German ambassador in Israel. It was a very, very unique and special event. And it's on Zoom, which we had to turn to with COVID. And it just shows you the possibilities that we have now to create such meaningful events. Thank you.
Thank you very much to both of you for demonstrating the depth and the richness and the imaginative responses your projects offer to the challenges that I've sketched earlier on.
Okay.
It seems to me that both your projects are so successful because they both rely on kind of bottom-up grassroots involvement of ordinary people. That's kind of something that both projects share. And furthermore, both your projects appear to be globally successful, especially the Zikaron Bassalon one, which has reached out to global audience, but also the Stolpersteine projects. And I think this global success has something to do with the intimacy of the projects. Both projects share a sense of intimacy. The Stolpersteine are very small in scale, and they make a meaningful connection of the individual victims and their names and their histories and the locality from which they were deported. And Zikaron Bassalon uses the setting of the salon or the living room to enable this kind of effective relationship between the few survivors that we still have and the later generation, especially the younger generations. So can I just ask each of you one question? So Sharon, I'd like to ask you, how can this intimacy be maintained when the last survivors are gone and when we need to rely entirely on the mediation of memories? And what were your experiences in this regard during COVID-19, when you could not stage these live events, obviously, and you had to use Zoom because this kind of eye contact is very difficult on Zoom. I do Zoom all the time. And Anne, I'd like to ask you, could you comment a bit more on the kind of research people engage in at grassroots level before installing the Stolpersteine, and what kind of ceremonies accompany the laying of them? So these are my questions, and then we'll go to the chats and feedback the audience's responses. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. So in response to your question, I will say that, first of all, we have tens of thousands of events every year. And unfortunately, we don't have survivors in each and every event. And we nowadays, even we rely on second and third generation in many cases, but also on recorded testimonies. And you are absolutely right. We are dreading the day that we won't have survivors among us, because this will make the Holocaust a very distant memory. So what we are trying to do with Zikaron Bassalon, we're trying to make this action that you take. You make a Zikaron Bassalon, okay? We try to establish this as a tradition. In 2 days from now, the Jews all over Israel and around the world will sit around a Seder table for Passover, and they will read from the Haggadah. They will read about the story of Exodus. And we say on that day, V'igadata lebincha, you shall tell your son the story on that day. And this is exactly what we're trying to do. We want people to understand that the importance of Holocaust commemoration, it needs to go the same way with Pesach, with Passover, from generation to generation, making Zikaron Bassalon a tradition that in 20 years from now, 30 years from now, 100 years from now, it will be so obvious that this is what we do. And the memory of the Holocaust will be in each and every living room.
Okay, thank you.
To touch on COVID, I have to say that thanks to COVID, if you can thank COVID for anything, it opened up many possibilities for us. And now we are able to connect Holocaust survivors from Israel to around the world. It opened up the possibility, like you saw in the presentation, having an event with Mrs. Budenbender, together with a Holocaust survivor who was in Jerusalem while the event was happening and when she gave her testimony. So Zoom enables us to do a lot of things, but we are really looking forward for the world to go back to normal, and we'll be able to sit next to each other, shoulder to shoulder, and remember together.
Thank you. So can I come to you, and then with my question about the kind of research that is required before actually the Stolpersteine can be laid down, because it's not just the ceremony, but I'm also interested in hearing about what kind of ceremonies accompany the placement of the stones.
I mean, just as the stones are different, each ceremony is different. So I'll start with that. I mean, and also maybe to start with the COVID ceremony, I actually attended an installation attended, as I am attending this conference today, in Poland earlier on this year, in October, which was incredible because I was there. The survivors. There was a woman in Devon in England who had come over on the Kindertransport, and she was attending from Devon, and there were dozens of us watching these stones being put into the ground in Poland with a simultaneous translation at the same time. And the translator had a GoPro, and he was just filming the ceremony. And it was extremely moving. And it was the first time I'd attended a Zoom installation. But I thought, well, this is the future. Unfortunately, however, that doesn't mean that the relatives and people, Gunther talks of a story of one installation where relatives who had never met, some from South Africa, some from New Zealand, so they all ended up at the same installation in Germany. And that the physical aspect of that is just, you can't, that cannot be replaced by a Zoom or by a screen installation. So as you, Sharon, I hope that we will be going back to the physical installations. The ceremonies, they'll sometimes be a religious ceremony, and Kaddish will be spoken. There'll sometimes be music. It really depends. We don't organize the ceremonies. Gunther comes, he places the stones, and then the ceremonies are organized by whoever wanted the stone to be placed in the first place. One of the saddest ones I've ever attended in Berlin was when nobody was there, because it was one woman who didn't have any children. There were no descendants, no friends. There was absolutely no one. It was a rainy day in winter in Berlin, and it was just locals who were there and us. And I thought, well, actually, that's also extremely important to show people that not everyone has families, not everyone has descendants, and yet these people are being remembered. And just to touch on the research, well, that's again, I trust people to do the research. Of course, we can check, but if somebody says to me that if they contact me from the US or from Israel, they say that their great grandmother died in a particular camp in Czechoslovakia, then I trust her to have been told that she's done the research, been told the stories as much as possible, and then we of course check to make sure that the facts are correct. But they do their own research. Children in schools, pupils will maybe see somebody who is the same age as them, and they will say, we want to place a Stolperstein for that child because they're the same age as I was or as I am. Historical associations in Germany, volunteer groups in Holland, hundreds of them who just want to do something for their local town. So all sorts of people, some people writing books. There's a guy right now who wants to write a children's book about the Stolpersteine, and he wants to place a Stolperstein in Nice and so he's just doing his own research for children. So all sorts of reasons for doing research.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Just one additional question in relation to the Stolperstein, and then we go to the question and answer session. Not everyone is convinced by the Stolpersteine, and Charlotte Knobloch, as you know, a Holocaust survivor and the former president of the Central Council of Jews in Germany, and she held many other positions, opposed them in Munich, because she had issues with the idea of having to walk over the names of those who were deported and killed. What would you say in response to that objection?
I mean, Gunther said from the very beginning, nobody has to have a Stolperstein. Nobody imposes Stolperstein on anyone. We always ask if it's not a relative who wants the Stolperstein. We always say all relatives should be informed, should be found in advance. If they don't want a Stolperstein, there's absolutely no reason. And in Munich itself, there were many people, especially there was one man whose both his parents were killed in the Holocaust. He was in England. He had come over on a Kindertransport, a Jewish man. He wanted his Stolperstein for his parents. They were placed. Gunther actually made Stolperstein for him. He was one of the first people who contacted Gunther and said, I want Stolperstein. They were placed in the ground and then they were removed for that very reason, because Charlotte Knobloch and various other people did not want it. And he said he felt as if his parents had been murdered a second time. So, and there are now many Jewish organizations in Munich who are wanting Stolpersteine to be placed. So it's a very difficult debate. The same argument has been put forward by somebody at the Mémorial de la Shoah in Paris. But generally, that argument is not, for one, I don't know if you've ever seen, but in Germany, you never see people walking on the Stolpersteine anyway. People walk around, they bend over. I saw one older man once he had a cane and he was bent in two reading the inscriptions. It was extremely moving. People do not walk unless they're not thinking. They do not walk on the Stolpersteine. So that's one argument, but it seems to be countered by many others. But as I say, there's no obligation.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And of course, it also shows that when a memory is contested, it is alive. I think, because we are having this debate, it shows that the memory is alive. Yeah. The fact that, you can have different positions towards this project. So Charlotte Knobloch, for good reason, thinks it's not successful. Personally, I think it is extremely successful. They make me stop in my track. I bend down, I look at them, I read them, they make me think. And it's the intimacy of it that I think is so wonderful. So wonderful. So now perhaps we should look at the chat and the question and answers, because a lot of questions have been coming in. So Robert, can I ask you to help me? I haven't had time to read any of them, but I can see that there's a lot of conversation going on. So could you perhaps pick a few and begin to open it out to our audience?
Yes, gladly. Thank you, Anna. A few of them are actually comments on how helpful art, different forms of art. We've heard here about sculptures and poetry and other forms of art. Film has been mentioned. How all these different forms of art can contribute in keeping the memory alive. So this was a comment from a few people rather than a question. And also the importance was stressed of engaging with memorials, of visiting places. The ambassador of Poland to Ireland highlighted or emphasized the Auschwitz memorial and their social media activity too, where they share the names of individual victims, which goes along the same lines as the Stolpersteine, except you stumble across these names in the social media. There is a question regarding Poland also, while we're on this one country, from Roisin Healy in Galway. How have the Stolpersteine been received in Poland? Has there been any backlash against it? Any resentment at the focus on Jews when Poland was one of the countries most affected?
Maybe the ambassador from Poland could answer that question. As we personally, as a team, do not ask for permission for Stolpersteine. The first ones were actually placed illegally in Cologne and then in Berlin, and little by little they then became a very accepted form in Germany, apart from in Poland, apart from in Munich, a very accepted form of memory. And now they're even Chancellor Merkel has mentioned the Stolpersteine, but that took 25 years. Poland seems to not want Stolpersteine. I don't actually know why. We haven't been ever told officially why, but every time somebody does try to have them placed, there seems to be a rejection. Either the municipality just doesn't answer the request, or they're told that they're not an acceptable form for Poland, that Poland has other forms of remembrance. There are a few in smaller parts of Poland, but there are none in Warsaw, there are none in Krakow, there are none in Łódź. There are just a couple in Wrocław, and a few in smaller places. But nonetheless, we do try every year to organize a tour. And once again, this year, Gunther was planning to go in July, but because he's not yet been vaccinated, he won't be able to go. Nonetheless, we'll be making the Stolpersteine and we'll be sending them to Poland. I think as Anna Fuchs, you were saying, there's a huge debate going on. And just the fact that the debate is happening in Poland is important. And as Gunther said, the Stolpersteine are not only for Jewish people, so they could be for those million Polish people who were killed by the Nazis, non-Jewish Poles. They could be for resistance people in Poland. So and the same when Charlotte Knobloch is against this project in Munich, that also means that gay Munich residents can also not have a Stolperstein. So in Poland, the debate continues, and there is reluctance, but we hope that with time they'll be all over Krakow.
Yeah.
Thank you, Anne. One short question, perhaps. Is there a website listing all these names? We heard the impressive number 86,000 from Gunther Demnig. Is there a list of all these names?
We're working on it. We're working on it.
I want to suggest. Sorry, Anne, I want to suggest that we will try to host Zikaron Basalon event for each of those names in all these homes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's take it as a project.
And play Stolperstein for all the people who attend those events.
That's a fantastic suggestion and a fantastic connection between your two projects. What a wonderful idea. And of course, we need to follow up on this then and see how you're doing next year with this. Why don't we have a follow-on event to see whether we can bring these two projects together, perhaps as a live event, which we can also then relay through Zoom to reach out to a global audience. Wouldn't that be wonderful? I wanted to pick up a long comment by the ambassador of the Netherlands. I'm not going to read it out because it's very long. I just want to summarize that the ambassador emphasizes the function of art, especially in the mediation of memory, because it's not abstract. Art offers us different forms of remembrance, modes of connection, affective forms, etc. And Sharon, you emphasized the second part of the three-part movement of your remembrance events, namely expression, music, readings, and so on. Can you comment a bit more? And perhaps, Anne, you too, in what way is the form of the Stolperstein, the intimacy, but then again, it's a shiny form. You know, there's a beauty about it in the sense that, you know, it shines on the pavement. You need to look down, you see it. It makes this name so special. Can you comment a bit about art, why art is so important in the age of post-memory?
What a big question. I think to us, it's a way of connecting between the testimony and the discussion. We understand it after hearing a survivor's story. It's not, you know, we always say that Zikaron Basalon is not a history lesson. Zikaron Basalon doesn't come and teach you about the Holocaust. It's exactly like the stumbling stone, Stolperstein. It's about the one name, the one family, their hopes, their dreams, their aspirations, their darkest moments, their fears. And through art, we are really able to connect to what we just heard. It's like I said, it's almost like a break, to give us a little break and take it all in just before we move on to the discussion. So I hope this answered the question a little bit.
And Anne, can you comment on this too, kind of, you know, because obviously Günther Demnig is an installation and performance artist, so he, you know, he's not a historian.
Yeah, I mean that's he is an artist who was inspired by Joseph Beuys, and I mean you can just see in the form it's extremely simple and extremely minimalist. Not only is the inscription minimalist, but he, as you say, it's about connecting really the person reading with that person commemorated. It's a direct connection between the two. He's also now been, the Stolperstein project has been described as the biggest decentralized sculpture in the world, I mean now. And then and the other thing that's been commented upon is that the way I don't know if you've ever attended, if anyone's attended an installation, but he, just as that man we just saw in the report, the way he cleans and polishes, and he says it's as though he was stroking the person for the last time. Gunther does exactly the same. He places it into the ground, so these are not tombs, these are not gravestones, but nonetheless he puts the stone into the ground, lowers it into the hole, and then he polishes it as well. And people have said that this is almost like installation art. It's a performance. So in that sense, I think it has a very personal and deep connection that other more official memories, official monuments don't have in the same way.
We also had a question from somebody who would like to lay a Stolperstein for their parents. Is there a website where they can check out how they can proceed about it?
Yeah, it's called stolpersteiner.eu. And I am international at stolpersteiner.eu. You can contact me directly and I'll put you in touch with the right person, or I may be the person.
Excellent, excellent. So looking at the time, I'm gonna wrap it up and pass it back to the German ambassador, Daike Potzel, who will make some concluding remarks. Before doing that, I want to thank both of you, and Thomas and Sharon Buenos, for two wonderful presentations about two wonderful projects. It's been a journey through time. It's been a journey that has affected all of us. And hopefully this connectivity that we've created today could be taken forward. So actually that we work on this and create a living connection between these two projects to keep the memory of the Holocaust alive, especially for the younger generations in this complicated era that we inhabit. So thank you so much. And thank you to the audience. It's been a pleasure to have been able to moderate this discussion. And I'm handing back to the ambassador.
Yeah, well, and I can only echo that. Thanks. I have to say I'm pretty overwhelmed. I think those stories that you shared with us were just incredible. I would like to thank you, Anna, for taking the time to moderate this debate. It's fantastic to see you doing this and helping us to get into the subject. I would like to thank Anne Thomas and obviously also Sharon. I have to say that I was extremely moved by what you were telling us about Bernie, for instance. This story is just incredible. And I was also very moved when you were talking about, this eye-to-eye contact in your very intimate settings. And I was reminded of a absolutely moving meeting we had when I had the honor to accompany President Gauck at the time to Jerusalem, and we met Holocaust survivors in a very intimate setting. And we were all in tears, including the president. And it was just so moving, and it's still a kind of, it really moves me, like going back there. It's a fantastic format. And I'm also, I think I said that before, I'm a huge fan of the Stolpersteine. So, keep going. And yes, some people might not, be convinced that this is a way to remember, but as you described it, I stop. I don't step on them. I would never do that, but I stop and I reflect. And so I think it's really, we were able to listen to fantastic projects. And if indeed a cooperation came out of this seminar, I couldn't be more happy about this day today. So thank you all very much. And allow me also to thank Aisling from the Israeli embassy here in Dublin for the fantastic work in preparing this seminar. Ophir, I see you nodding. Thank you also that you took the time, of course, but I think both our thanks goes out to Aisling and also to Robert. Robert really worked tirelessly. This was our first sort of our own online seminar. So Robert, fantastic work. Thank you so much for making this possible with all the technicalities. And he said till like late last night to translate the little film there by Gunter Demnig. So great work. Thank you so much, everyone. And thank you to all the participants. Thanks for tuning in. Such an important topic. And I'm so glad that you all took the time. So thank you so much. And hope to see you again. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye now. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye to everybody. See you again in a different forum.
Sharon, I'll be in touch
Bye.
by email. And thank you,
Yes,
Anna.
perfect.
Yeah, thanks. Nice meeting you. Bye.
Nice meeting you all.
Robert, thank you for your work.
And Aisling as well. Thank you for including us.
Chag Sameach, Sharon.
Chag Sameach. Happy Pesach.
Yeah, happy Pesach to you both.